Our fellow teacher, Heather Monroe, is with us today to talk about how relational trauma affects us and how we heal. Heather is an integrative psychotherapist who specializes in the healing of relational trauma. Through her extensive training and work in clinical and experiential modalities, Heather guides clients through a holistic and transformative process. Heather's approach to helping people is creative, open, and flexible, as she understands that just as the context of trauma is individual, so is the process of healing. Welcome to AVAIYA, Heather.
Thank you so much for having me. This is exciting.
Yeah, so glad to have you. And I'm so curious, since the topic today surrounds relational trauma, why don't you get us started with that? What is relational trauma?
Yeah, I define relational trauma as a consistent disruption in a child's sense of safety. And that's both emotionally and physically in a family system. So consistent disruption in a child's sense of safety, physical and emotional in the family that they come from.
Gotcha. And so, as far as people who have experienced this relational trauma as children, and let's say most of the people watching right now are adults having had this kind of trauma as a child, what are the different kinds of effects that it can have on their lives?
Yeah, I want to just quickly explain just some examples of what consistent disruption can look like for people, just so you can get a really good sense of, oh yes, or oh no, not really. So overt, really obvious relational trauma contenders would be physical abuse, sexual abuse, and emotional abuse in the family. So if any of those things happened, absolutely that is overt relational trauma, or neglect, abandonment. More covert, less obvious, more nuanced signs of relational trauma. And remember, this is consistent. So it's like death by 1,000 paper cuts almost, would be psychological control, emotional incest, blaming and shaming, and enmeshment. So enmeshment with a parent where you don't know where you end and your parent begins, kind of thing. And then inverted relationship, which is when the child is taking care of the parent rather than the parent taking care of the child. Mm-hmm. And emotional incest would be that kind of inverted relationship, but with an uncontained sense of sexual boundaries. So if you were objectified physically as a child, if you were treated like a surrogate husband or wife to your parent, so your parent overshared like about their dating life or about their sexual life to you. If they made comments like, if you weren't my child, you'd be in trouble. I would, you would totally be my type. I would date you, that kind of thing. So it doesn't mean that there is any sort of physical sexual abuse. It is much more nuanced, and it's an emotional incest where like you are being put in a position of being a surrogate partner instead of a child to a caretaker. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was going to ask you what that meant, because I had never heard that actual terminology before. And it's so interesting. I've certainly heard of many people experiencing, right, a parent like, unloading all of their wants to date and talking about their dating life and all that stuff with little kids. But I never really like thought about that other piece you just mentioned, which is, that's very disturbing.
And also like if a parent isn't around that much, but then they want really intense like moments with you as a child, if you're not around for like the folding socks piece and just like the everyday mundane thing, that intense, like that the intensity that a parent can bring around more intimate moments, like let's say wanting the child to share their poetry with them, or wanting to cuddle with them at night without the other stuff, it can feel too intense for a child. So the child can feel like, this is yucky, this doesn't feel safe to me, because there hasn't been that foundation of safety, of just like palling around, doing that. The parent's absent for that piece.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Another different way that I've never really looked at it before, how that can create that absence in their life. And then, yeah, too much closeness.
Too much. Yeah. It's too much for their sense, for for the child's nervous system. It just feels like, ugh. So signs of that could be pretending you're asleep when a child comes in to tuck you in, not because you're just nervous about being close to that parent. When they hug you, you find that you don't want to hug them, that it feels icky. They might, pinch your butt too late in life, that kind of thing. So you're always a little hyper vigilant around where that parent is positioned around your body, things like that. Those are signs.
Gotcha. Thank you. I appreciate you going through some different examples as it relates to relational trauma, and some of those things that, again, I'd never really heard of in that way. So bringing new terminology and awareness to these. I love that. So let's talk about the effects. If someone grows up with those different types of trauma, I think you talk about 6 effects or something like that in your work. So what are those?
Okay. So I put all of these under an umbrella of attachment. All of these overt and covert relational deviances and traumas are going to create issues in the way that we connect to ourselves, and to the world around us, to other human beings. And as we know, we are physiologically hardwired for connection. So this is actually how we have evolved and how we have survived evolution, is through our attachments with our tribe, with other humans. So attachment is the basis of of well-being. Like how we attach to other people in our relationships is going to be a huge indicator of our well-being as humans. And when we have relational trauma, it blurs what attachment is supposed to look like for us, especially secure attachment. So there's the umbrella of attachment. And then the spokes of the umbrella, I would put under the spokes would be boundaries being one spoke, self-care, perception, how we view ourselves in the world, intuition, and spirituality. So when we have relational trauma, when there's constant disruption in our sense of emotional and physical safety in our family, that is going to create a wounding, and it's going to do a couple of things to the way that we attach to the world. We are either going to be connected but not protected, meaning that we are completely open, but we allow other people's thoughts and feelings and beliefs and physical touch to kind of infiltrate us. We don't have a lot of walls, like relational walls, to kind of buoy us in our sense of self. So we allow other people's or the world to kind of infiltrate who we are. So there's a connection to the world, but there's no boundaries. There's no protection. And this can also be seen as like an anxious attachment style. So we cling to the people that might be hurting us, the people that might make us feel like they're going to abandon us. We cling to that person, like we clung most likely to a caregiver. And that's because our caregiver showed up sometimes, like sometimes they were attuned to our needs when we were younger. Sometimes they got it right, but usually they didn't. It was usually, like most of the time, they didn't get it right. So our needs we're always hoping as children, like maybe this time, but just even see my posture with maybe. It's a tightening, it's a breath holding, it's a constraint. And so there's an anxiety around people leaving us. There's an anxiety around abandonment. There's an anxiety around, am I able to actually like save myself? A lot of the time we were disempowered as children when we have anxious attachment. So we don't have the right to take up space in this world. There's like a feeling of that. There's a feeling of tell me who I am because I don't know who I am. So I've just described a lack of self-perception of how we see ourselves, right? Also a lack of boundaries. I'm connected, but I'm not protected. And also intuition, like because my thoughts and feelings were denied so much, it wasn't okay for me to maybe I would see mom or dad yelling and I'd say, and as a child, I'd say, you yelled at me. And mom said, no, I didn't. What are you talking about? I didn't yell at you. There's that shutdown of reality. when our reality is shut down enough and we're not heard and seen enough as children, and there's no repair, there's no that coming back to the child and saying, you know what, I did yell at you and I'm sorry, and that wasn't right, and I'm going to work on it. When there's no repair, we question what we feel inside. So we start questioning our knowing, like our intuition. And so we start doubting who we are and start doubting what we feel and start doubting our beliefs and our feelings and our just that knowing. And lastly, it damages our spirituality, because I look at attachment around connection to self, connection to others, connection to the earth, and connection to a higher force than us, like that energy of connection that kind of binds us all together, that spirituality, that divinity within ourselves and the world. It cuts us off from that as well, because a lot of the time we have to either make our parents our higher power, and they abuse that power when we have relational trauma. And so we no longer trust that a higher power is about love, and it's about seeing and truly feeling connected. And then there's another way our attachment can go, right? Our attachment can go towards avoidance. And this is when we're protected, but not connected. So we create relational walls all around us. No one's thoughts or feelings or beliefs can infiltrate this wall, but we are totally cut off from connection. And so we are, almost like barely living, it feels like. There's this sense of aloneness, but it's too scary to connect, because our parents, people with avoidant kind of attachment, our parents never got it right. So with anxious, like they sometimes got it right, but avoidant attachment is really when your parents never really got it right. And so you had to create these walls around you. So you are, while anxious attachment is boundary-less, avoidant is boundary-full, is how I describe it. There is a lack of self-care with avoidant, because you have there's a real cutoff around your feelings. You had to cut yourself off from your feelings in order not to feel that pain of a parent or a parental figure never being attuned to your needs. So you no longer know what your needs are, and you don't allow other people to know what your needs are. And you're cut off from your intuition, because intuition is a felt sense of knowing. And when we cut ourselves off from our bodies and cut ourselves off from our feelings, which is the language of our bodies, we no longer have a sense of what that knowing feels like to us. Mm-hmm. So it affects us differently, depending on where we kind of lean towards, anxious or avoidant. And we go back and forth with these two, so there can be a kind of a flip-flopping of both. But yeah, these are the ways that it affects us in a really a real nutshell.
Right. A very small nutshell. Yeah. And interesting how you described also that, right, the anxious attachment is when our parents sometimes got it right, but the avoidant is when they just never got it right. I've never heard anyone describe it like that. That's such an interesting thing, and makes so much sense, in the world of becoming avoidant. Yeah, of course, you're going to build up these big, huge, thick walls when, you just never got what you needed. So, yeah. So let's talk healing in a nutshell.